Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me for our Meet the Management Team video series, where we introduce some of the executives in GovCon, chat a bit about their roles, and discuss how leadership teams work together to achieve company-wide goals. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and with me today are members of ERT's executive team. We have Mark Lee, CEO, John Meyer, CFO, and Chris Rodriguez, CGO. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thanks to be here. It's good to see you.
Too. So before we jump in and to provide a bit of context around our conversation, I understand that about a year ago, ERT received a major investment from Macquarie Capital to foster continued growth in the company and to transition out of the small business space into the full playing field of the federal contracting market. So I understand this brought with it leadership transitions and an evolved business strategy focus on M&A. So, Mark, I'd like to start by asking if you can share with us your experience of being brought into the company to lead the company after Macquarie Capital's investment, and what was your strategy for building this new leadership team?
All right. Well, yeah, great. It's great to see you, Amanda. And yeah, thanks for having us today. You know, I spent about 25 years at ICF and had a really great run there. And obviously, they do such great work, and there's a lot of great people there. But I decided I really was ready to do something different, and I was pretty sure that I wanted to do something likely a PE-backed, private equity-backed uh, organization. And so I talked to a bunch of people that I knew in the industry, talked to a number of private equity firms, some privately held firms, and through all that, got sort of reconnected with Jared Doscal at Macquarie Capital, who we've known each other for a number of years. And he mentioned that they were pretty close to closing this company ERT, and that the founders were going to stay engaged, but likely transition into more of an advisory role. They were ready to have a little bit more free time, as I think we all would be. And he was going to need to build a new management team. So we started talking more, and he was telling me about the company and the investment thesis. And the more and more we talked, the more and more interested that I got. I mean, first off, I've known the Macquarie guys and have a lot of respect for them, like how they operate. So that was already sort of in the plus column. But I really liked getting back the opportunity to get back to more of the science and engineering work. Is sort of what I did as I was sort of growing up in my career, and having the opportunity to pivot a little bit more into the space market, which I know a little bit about, but it was largely new to me. But I was pretty confident that that was going to be a good place to be. The last 6 months have proven it was even better than I had imagined, given some of the changes in the market. So all that kind of came together, and it just seemed like the perfect fit. So I joined, I guess, a week after the transaction closed. But as part of that, the first thing that Jerry told me is that they were going to need to bring a CFO in as well. And honestly, as part of my doing my rounds, I had talked to John, who we've known each other for probably 10 years or so, from overlapped a lot at ICF, did a lot of deals together while we were there. And he was sort of giving me the lay of the land with the private equity space. And as we were talking, I'm like, well, what about you? Because he was a CFO at a smaller company. And he was like, well, yeah, let's talk. And we started talking, and yeah, so he came in basically a week after me, and um, that was really helpful to have somebody that I'd known for a while involved in this, and that I knew the numbers and the finances. And then the next step was to find a growth lead, and for that, I didn't really want to do a big search unless I had to. So I started going out through my network, and one of our board members, I was meeting with him and telling him what I was looking for, and he was like, I think I might have your guy. And he had put me in touch with Chris. And first meeting, I was like, oh man, this is actually pretty interesting. And the more that we got to know each other, I'm like, this is my guy. This is who I need for this role. And I mean, first off, he had worked in the space space, and and he can say more about his background, but really, I knew he knew the market in the ways that I didn't. And the other thing I really liked about him is that, we're very different in how we approach problem solving, but I think in a very complementary way. I'd had a few folks with me at ICF that are always sort of the yin to my yang. And I saw that in Chris, and that was a big thing that I was looking for as well. It wasn't just the experience, but it was also that, sort of how do the team dynamics work? And he was a perfect fit for that. And the last thing is that people that I think are comfortable moving fast, which sometimes means missteps, but as long as we learn from those missteps, I think that's valuable. And I think surrounding myself with people that are sort of wired like that certainly was sort of what I was looking for, and I've been grateful that we've been able to pull that off.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing a bit about that background, Mark. I'm also curious how you've built this team foundationally to support the company's growth strategy, especially as its focus is primarily on M&A.
I think that the investment thesis is certainly has a significant inorganic or acquisition component. We're also very focused on organic growth, which is certainly where Chris probably spends 95% of every day, and I fully support him in those efforts. Um, but yeah, I think certainly M&A is an important part of our strategy. It's part of what attracted me to the role. It's actually a big part of also why I was excited to get John to join, because he's got a ton of experience there, which again he can speak to. Um, but we've added a CFO, a CGO, innovation lead, a few other folks, a new business unit leader, and I think what I was looking for in each person was a little bit different. But I think the most important thing for me is having a thought partner and a strategic CFO, someone who's not just in the numbers, but understands, as we're thinking about M&A from a strategy perspective, what might fit and how might that affect our finances, and how can we make sure this is a good deal for all the investors. And that is where John is sort of is really, I think, is really unique and special. And I think that was really, really important to me in a CFO. I think, with Chris, I mentioned his experience in our sector was super important. High EQ in terms of, because you're going to have a lot of moving pieces. Growth is stressful. So you got to have somebody that can sort of keep the team's head in the game and balance a lot of, at times the best BD folks sometimes are a bit mercurial. So you got to be good at balancing all of that. I think the rest of the team that we've been building out, a big focus for me has been, thinking who's a big thinker, who's thinking more innovatively, so that we can make sure that as we're moving forward, that ERT is winning on ideas, and that we're really leaning forward with technology and how to find more efficiencies. And there's so much happening in our markets. It was happening before the change in administration, but I think in some ways it's accelerated now. So we need folks that are comfortable and excited by the challenges that presents. That's been a big part of how I've been building out the team. And from an M&A perspective, that also helps with figuring out what targets make the most sense. Who is going to really up our game from a capability standpoint.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So, John, can you share a bit about your M&A experience and background and how it's applicable to ERT's current growth goals and strategies?
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having us. Just to echo previous comments. So my career, it really spans a broad range of M&A, private equity, finance and accounting, and strategy roles. Specifically, it was, I cut my teeth in PwC, first in audit and transaction services. Went into public company corporate development at ICF, where Mark and I intersected for a fairly long time and got a pretty good track record together. And, in my broader experience, I've executed or advised on deals ranging from $200,000 add-ons for two-person businesses all the way up to $8 billion combined enterprise value mergers of public companies. And so I've seen the full gamut of scale up and down the totem pole. And I think that's really important to operate inside of a company that's growing, because where we're coming from and where we need to get to at the same time. Separate to that, I think, to Mark's point, a background in due diligence and transaction services translates really well to strategic finance. When you spend your time digging into other CFOs' outputs and essentially growing them on their numbers, it translates pretty well to knowing how you need to be buttoned up on your own, and really just KPIs, metrics of the business, understanding what buyers look at, having that buyer's lens, and sort of turning that diligence eye inwards. In my experience, being a CFO, that's really where the skill set comes from, is the diligence days. As a buyer, and where I think most of my career accolades come from, is a sweet spot in the middle market or lower middle market, and specifically acquisitions where the target is a founder-owned business that is coming into something new that you're building, and they can play a big role in the combined success. And so, at ICF, that was ITG, semantic bits, creative systems and consulting. Those would be the largest deals to point to. At ICF, I executed on 10 deals while I was there, a dozen if you count the ones that I had a hand in after I left, for a little over $700 million in enterprise value. And when you do the math and you average everything out, it translates pretty much perfectly to the exact type of businesses that we want to acquire here and the exact scale that we want to acquire here. So, my background in M&A, clearly, as Mark alluded to, M&A is part and parcel to our strategy, and expanding into the places we want to go, acquiring the capabilities that we need to execute there, and along with the customer intimacy we need to serve the federal government more broadly. It looks, smells, and feels a whole like what we've done before, and building something cool is something that you don't get to do too often in your career, and have certainty of being able to do that when you go into a new role. And I think we've got it here in spades. And being a year and 8 days in, I can certainly say that is how it feels being here. There's a lot of progress that we've made thus far.
Awesome. So kind of expanding on that progress, what opportunities does Macquarie Capital's investments provide ERT in terms of being able to move quickly in the M&A market and scale the way it needs to in order to serve wider market areas?
Sure. So the very first thing is being sponsored by Macquarie just provides instant credibility to the entire M&A community. That's founders, it's bankers, it's other private equities. We are suddenly on everyone's radar. Being the third investment in the government, federal government contracting space for Macquarie, they have their own track record of success, and I think it brings attention to us that we wouldn't be able to get if we were still founder owned or took an investment from another private equity. And Macquarie's flavor is unique in the sense that it provides unconstrained access to capital, because Macquarie is investing in ERT off of its own balance sheet, and there are no fund timelines to pay attention to. There's no limited partners. It's really just one sponsor making decisions with their own capital, and that allows us to get creative and be flexible and not be subject to timelines that put pressure on us. If we think it makes sense to bring ERT ultimately to market at some point in the future, it's really just a decision on when we think the time is right, not something that is externally forced upon us. At the same time, Macquarie is a global asset manager, and portfolio companies for Macquarie actually roll up to publicly traded financials in Australia. And along with that comes a level of sophistication that's required. It allows us to be a little more sophisticated than our scale would typically require or suggest. For instance, we're now audited by PwC. We've got large firms providing all of our services from a legal standpoint, from a accounting services standpoint, and there's a baseline expectation of how things are run across all back office functions that being sponsored by Macquarie really provides the framework and the skeleton for us to be able to operate at a much larger scale than what we're currently built for, or at least we're built for before the Macquarie investment. And then I think the biggest asset in terms of executing on our strategy that they provide is now we've got a deal team. We can provide financing in any way, shape, or form that we need to, and the relationships and the ability to execute quickly on deals provides that infrastructure from a corporate development standpoint that sets us up nicely to go on an acquisition spree.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right. So Chris, kind of diving more into that growth aspect, what markets is ERT planning to expand into as part of its growth and M&A strategy? Why is it interested in these particular sectors?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Great to be with you today. I think when you look at our history here at ERT, we've been heavily indexed in providing really exceptional service at NOAA, with pockets of really great work at the Air Force and NASA within the ground segment and the scientific domains. Luckily, that level of historic excellence has created really a great base to expand into other markets. And for us, the logical growth sectors include the defense-based community, including supporting the national security space and supporting NASA in some of their future mission sets. We touch both of those customer sets currently through our OMS program and some of our other programs. And we found that many of the same skill sets and expertise we offer currently are directly relevant to these other missions. The second part of your question about why we're interested in those sectors, you heard Mark mention this earlier, but ERT has a culture of problem solvers, people that like looking at challenges and finding creative, intelligent ways to resolve those challenges. Supporting future missions at NASA, whether it's return to the moon, the mission to Mars, or even space-based science supporting decision-making for the commercial and private sectors or the government sector here at home. Those are the type of challenges that I think really interest the personnel at ERT and attract the type of people we're looking to bring into our organization. And then in the defense space market, there's a natural pivot from the work we're doing supporting American interests to finding future work supporting American interests and defending America. I mean, culturally, we really want to be a company that offers solutions in as many different domains while staying true to our market space. So moving into the defense space world is a really big piece of that puzzle. And companies that work in that space historically tend to have many of the same shared values of ERT.
All right, awesome. So Kristen, how are you building out your teams and bringing in the right people to meet the demands of these markets?
Yeah, like John, I've been very fortunate over the course of my career to have worked across a variety of different customer sets and a variety of different projects, everything from engineering and mission assurance to really business process outsourcing. That's made me a little bit of an evangelist for the process of business development. And it's really made me a believer in, I would say, two fundamental skill sets that, a good business development / capture manager / proposal manager needs in our space. The first of these, and you heard Mark mention it earlier, the first of these is emotional intelligence, right? You're going to be working with a lot of different people. Oftentimes, you're working with these people at the expense of their everyday jobs and responsibilities. And being able to have these individuals buy into your overall goal is critically important. Look, we can all say, hey, do this. This is the deadline. Go make it work. I found over the course of my career that the product that comes out of that is a little less effective when you don't create a psychologically safe space for people to work. And creating good product in our world and good proposals is really the end game. The second skill I really look for is the ability to see interconnectedness between ideas, right? It's a little bit more than just traditional intelligence, although, I think that's critically important. But part of what makes people in the business development world so successful is the aptitude to really see, an unusual connection between things and be able to bring together those disparate ideas into a cohesive picture while still maintaining some awareness of what, of course, it looks like the overall 50,000-foot view. Mm-hmm. So, with those two things in mind, when I interview folks to bring these in, I'm really looking for those two sort of personality skill traits in addition to deep customer relationships, either on the industry side or the government side. Having a deep network of relationships is incredibly valuable. But I would say that being able to have intelligent conversations with those relationships and then being able to translate those conversations into something impactful that offers a valuable solution to government requirements is really where I like, our team to try and shine.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all for diving a bit into your personal focus areas and priorities here. But my final question is for the whole team. What do you look for in terms of company culture, capabilities, and overall compatibility when strategizing for M&A? How do you ensure prospective acquisitions are a good fit for both companies involved?
Maybe I'll dive in first. I think, and this is hard won perspective, but we always go into these things from the very beginning thinking about integration. And, you're never going to find two identical cultures, but it's very much about compatible cultures. And Chris sort of touched on it. Do they value the same things that we generally value? And are they motivated similarly to how we're motivated? I mean, that's the first sort of check. You got to make sure that the companies can work together, because even if the capabilities are a perfect match, if the cultures are not compatible, then it's not going to be a successful deal. Then I think it goes to, all right, what's our strategy? What capabilities are we missing, and or what client relationships are we missing? We look to sort of see how they fill those gaps. But then you also look at, like, all right, because sometimes when you have these founder run companies, the founders have been, the really the driver behind the success. Well, if their plan is to just to sell and then move on, you got to really evaluate, all right, well, what am I getting if this sort of, really special person is not here anymore? So we're kind of looking at the team that will be there for us post close. And then obviously the numbers and the valuation, all that have to make sense. But to me, you got to get through all those other stage gates before you even spend time thinking about that.
Yeah, I would add to that, Mark, maybe from the growth side. One of the things that's exciting in our domain is the world of opportunities is relatively finite, right? We don't have an entire whole of government world of opportunities. So when we look at companies that we want to acquire or work with, finding commonalities in the targets and the opportunities that we want to go after, from my perspective, is very interesting because it provides, what Mark talked about in a post-integration world, it provides a really quick insight into how organizations think, right? Because strategy on these bids can be so different company to company. And it really helps to identify very early on how we do the proverbial 1 + 1 = 3, because you get a really keen insight into the mentality of the decision makers and the mentality of the growth team when you're reviewing their strategy, which is just wildly important from a growth side to be able to get that as quickly as possible. So,
John, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mark took a lot of the words out of my mouth. Chris and I had a lot of the same ideas. From my experience, I could tell you, going into the corp dev role at ICF, I had this notion that I think a lot of financial practitioners have, which is the numbers are everything. And I couldn't have learned more quickly how wrong that really is. I think, to Mark's point, strategy, people, and culture trumps everything from a financial standpoint. The old saying, strategy, versus culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? I think in looking at deals that have been successful, the thing that I've found is most important to look for in a management team or a culture is really AQ, adaptability quotient, the ability to handle change and adapt how they do things. And really, when you think about integration and integration success, it's all about change, transformation, and adaptability. And so if I think it's healthy to get through acquisitions cultures that are different from yours, but can actually mesh well and provide new perspective, and making sure that they follow the no jerks rules, and making sure that everybody comes together. And you'll find out in diligence if that's the case, but make sure that everybody can come together and be able to work together to accomplish the same joint objective.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much again for being here and giving us kind of this unique look into building a team, especially after an investment like this, and the transitions that you're going through. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.